The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood quietly by the tall windows of their private quarters. Her fingers traced the cool glass as she watched the steady stream of people gathering beyond the gates, their arms filled with flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes. The sight had become familiar over the past few days, yet it never failed to move her deeply. William emerged from their bedroom, his usually composed demeanor showing the weight of recent events. The nation was in mourning, and, as senior members of the royal family, they carried not just their own grief but the collective sorrow of millions. The loss had been sudden, unexpected, and had left the entire country reeling. What had started as an ordinary Tuesday had transformed into one of the darkest days in recent British history. Catherine turned from the window as her husband approached, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set with determination. They had been through difficult times before, but this felt different. The public's need for comfort, for leadership, for someone to acknowledge their pain, was palpable. The traditional protocols and formal responses felt inadequate in the face of such raw emotion. "The flowers have tripled since yesterday," Catherine observed softly, her voice carrying the gentle concern that had endeared her to the British public over the years. "I can see people camping out there, William. Some of them have been there since dawn." William joined her at the window, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder as he took in the scene below. The sight of ordinary citizens from all walks of life, united in their grief, was both humbling and inspiring. There were elderly couples leaning on walking sticks, young families with children clutching teddy bears, teenagers who had likely never experienced such collective national sorrow, and middle-aged professionals still in their work clothes, having come straight from their offices to pay their respects. The couple had spent the previous evening in meetings with palace officials, discussing the appropriate response to the tragedy. The conversations had been formal, measured, and entirely focused on protocol and precedent. While William understood the importance of tradition and proper procedure, something about the clinical nature of those discussions had left him feeling disconnected from the very people they were meant to serve. Catherine had remained largely silent during those meetings, but William could sense her restlessness. She had always possessed an intuitive understanding of public sentiment, an ability to connect with people on an emotional level that transcended royal protocol. Her background as a commoner, though sometimes criticized by traditionalists, had given her insights into the hearts and minds of ordinary British citizens that proved invaluable in moments like these. As they stood together watching the growing crowd, Catherine's mind wandered to her own experiences of loss and grief. She remembered the awkwardness of receiving formal condolences, the way well-meaning but distant gestures had sometimes felt hollow when what she truly needed was simple human connection. The elaborate flower arrangements and formal cards had their place, but it was the unexpected moments of genuine compassion that had provided real comfort. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "when Mrs. Patterson from the village lost her husband last year? How she told us that what helped her most wasn't the formal service or the official acknowledgments, but when little Emma from next door simply sat with her in silence and held her hand." William nodded, understanding immediately where her thoughts were leading. Mrs. Patterson had been one of many local residents they had encountered during their community visits, and her story had stuck with both of them. The elderly woman had described how the simple, unscripted act of compassion from a child had meant more to her than all the formal expressions of sympathy combined. The tragedy that had befallen the nation was of a different magnitude entirely, but the principle remained the same. People needed to feel seen, acknowledged, and understood in their pain. They needed to know that their grief mattered, that their leaders shared in their sorrow not just as a matter of duty, but as fellow human beings. Throughout their marriage and their roles as working royals, William and Catherine had developed an understanding that went beyond words. They communicated through glances, subtle gestures, and an intuitive sense of each other's thoughts and feelings. In this moment, that silent communication was working overtime as they both grappled with the same realization. The protocols they had been discussing, the carefully planned public statements and formal ceremonies, while important and necessary, might not be enough. The people gathering outside their windows weren't just subjects of the crown, they were individuals processing profound grief, seeking comfort and connection in a time of unimaginable loss. Catherine's phone buzzed with another message from her private secretary, likely containing updates on the schedule of official engagements being planned for the coming days. She glanced at it briefly before setting it aside, her attention drawn back to the scene outside. A young mother had arrived with two small children, and Catherine watched as the woman carefully explained something to them before they placed their small bouquet of flowers among the thousands of others. The sight stirred something deep within Catherine's heart. As a mother herself, she could imagine the difficulty of explaining such tragedy to young minds, the challenge of providing comfort while processing one's own grief. She thought of her own children and how they had asked innocent but profound questions about what was happening, questions that had no easy answers. William's own thoughts were traveling similar paths. As second in line to the throne, he had been groomed from birth to understand the weight of responsibility that came with his position. He had always known that there would be moments when the nation would look to him for leadership, for stability, for the right words at the right time. But, knowing it intellectually and living it emotionally were entirely different experiences. The formal training he had received had prepared him for many scenarios, but no amount of preparation could fully equip someone for the raw reality of collective national grief. The people outside weren't looking for perfectly crafted speeches or elaborate ceremonies. They were looking for authenticity, for genuine connection, for leaders who understood their pain and shared their humanity. As the mourning progressed, the crowd outside continued to grow. Catherine and William found themselves returning to the window repeatedly, drawn by an almost magnetic pull to witness this outpouring of public emotion. Each time they looked, they saw new faces, new stories unfolding in the simple act of laying flowers and standing in quiet solidarity with their fellow citizens. There was something profoundly moving about the way people naturally organized themselves, creating pathways for others to approach and pay their respects, offering tissues to those who were crying, sharing umbrellas when a light rain began to fall. It was community in its purest form, strangers united by shared grief and a common need for connection. The palace staff continued their preparations for the official response, working tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect, every protocol observed, every precedent honored. Their dedication and professionalism were beyond question, and William and Catherine deeply appreciated their efforts. But, as the day wore on, both of them felt an increasing sense that something more personal, more immediate, was needed. Catherine found herself thinking about the thank you note she had written as a child, the way her mother had taught her that genuine appreciation required more than just proper words on expensive paper. It required thought, consideration, and a willingness to invest something of yourself in the gesture. The most meaningful thank you notes she had ever received had been handwritten, personal, and clearly crafted with care and attention. As afternoon melted into evening, the crowd outside showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, more people continued to arrive as the workday ended and families finished their dinners. The spontaneous memorial had taken on a life of its own, becoming not just a place to leave flowers but a gathering point for a community in mourning. William and Catherine shared a quiet dinner in their private quarters, the conversation naturally turning to what they had witnessed throughout the day. Both of them were deeply moved by the public response, by the dignity and grace with which ordinary citizens were processing their grief. There was something both heartbreaking and inspiring about the scene outside their windows. "They're not just leaving flowers," Catherine observed as they finished their meal. "They're creating something together. A space where grief can be shared and acknowledged." William nodded in agreement. He had noticed the same thing, the way people lingered, the quiet conversations between strangers, the gentle way parents helped their children understand the significance of the moment. It was democracy and community in action, people coming together in the most natural and human way possible. As they prepared for bed that evening, both William and Catherine found themselves drawn back to the window one final time. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but dedicated individuals remained, some sitting quietly in meditation, others continuing to add to the growing memorial. Small battery-operated candles had appeared, creating a gentle glow that illuminated the flowers and photographs. The sight was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a visual representation of a nation's collective soul laid bare. In that moment, both William and Catherine understood that their response to this tragedy would define not just their own relationship with the British people, but their understanding of what it truly meant to serve. The formal protocols and official ceremonies would have their place, and they would fulfill those obligations with the dignity and respect the situation demanded. But they also knew that something more was needed, something that would acknowledge the humanity of the moment and honor the genuine emotion they had witnessed throughout the day. As they settled into bed, neither of them spoke about the idea that was beginning to form in their minds. It was still too fragile, too uncertain to put into words. But both of them sensed that tomorrow would bring an opportunity to respond to their nation's grief in a way that was both unprecedented and entirely necessary. The last thing Catherine saw before closing her eyes was the gentle glow of those candles through their bedroom window, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, people find ways to create light and connection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to serve the people who had placed their trust in them. But tonight, they would rest in the knowledge that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a nation united in grief, finding comfort in community, and demonstrating the very best of human nature in the face of unimaginable loss. It was a sight that would stay with them forever, and one that would fundamentally change how they understood their role in the lives of the people they were privileged to serve. The morning brought with it a crispness that seemed to mirror the clarity of purpose that had settled in William and Catherine's minds overnight. They had both awakened with the same thought, though neither had yet spoken it aloud. The idea that had begun forming the previous evening had crystallized into something more concrete, more actionable, but also more daunting. Catherine rose early and made her way to the kitchen, something she did when she needed to think clearly. The simple act of preparing breakfast, of engaging in the most ordinary of human activities, often helped her process complex emotions and difficult decisions. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she could hear the gentle murmur of voices from outside, evidence that the impromptu memorial had continued through the night. When William joined her, they shared a look of understanding that bypassed the need for lengthy explanations. They had reached the same conclusion independently, and now they needed to figure out how to transform their instincts into reality. The challenge wouldn't be deciding what to do, but rather how to do it in a way that would be meaningful without being intrusive, personal without being inappropriate. The children were asking questions again last night, Catherine mentioned as she handed William his tea. Their own children had been trying to understand the national tragedy in the way that young minds do, seeking simple explanations for complex emotions. George wanted to know why everyone was so sad, and Charlotte asked if we were sad too. William nodded thoughtfully. The innocence of children often cuts straight to the heart of matters that adults complicated with protocol and procedure. Their children's questions had been direct and honest. Why were people sad? How could they help? What would make things better? The simplicity of those inquiries had helped crystallize what William and Catherine were beginning to understand. The formal meetings scheduled for that morning would focus on logistics and protocol, on ensuring that every official response was appropriate and properly coordinated. Those discussions were important and necessary, but they increasingly felt disconnected from the emotional reality they had witnessed the previous day. The people gathered outside weren't waiting for perfect protocol, they were processing grief in real time and looking for authentic connection. Catherine's background in art history had taught her to appreciate the power of gesture and symbol, the way simple acts could carry profound meaning across cultures and generations. Some of the most moving artistic expressions throughout history had been born not from grand commissions or elaborate planning, but from artists responding authentically to the emotional needs of their time. What if, she began carefully, testing the waters of an idea that felt both obvious and revolutionary, what if we simply went to them? Not as part of an official engagement, but as people who share their grief? William set down his cup and looked at her directly. The suggestion hung in the air between them, loaded with implications they both understood. It would mean stepping outside established protocols, improvising in a way that could be seen as either brilliantly intuitive or dangerously unpredictable. But it would also mean responding to their nation's emotional needs with the same authenticity they tried to bring to their roles as parents and partners. The more they discussed the idea, the more it felt not just appropriate but necessary. The people gathered outside weren't subjects waiting for an audience with royalty, they were fellow human beings processing shared trauma and seeking community in their grief. Meeting them on equal ground, as people united in sorrow rather than separated by protocol, might provide exactly the kind of comfort that formal responses, no matter how well-intentioned, could never achieve. But implementing such an idea would require careful consideration and delicate execution. They couldn't simply walk outside without thought for security, logistics, or the potential impact on the crowd itself. Their presence would inevitably change the dynamic of what had been a spontaneous expression of public grief. They needed to find a way to join the memorial without disrupting its organic nature. Catherine thought about the various public engagements she had participated in over the years, analyzing what had made some feel genuine and others feel staged. The most meaningful interactions had always been the unplanned moments, the spontaneous conversations that developed when protocol relaxed, the human connections that transcended formal roles and titles. Those moments had taught her that people responded to authenticity above all else. William's military training had taught him the importance of adaptation and improvisation, of responding to changing circumstances with flexibility and decisive action. Some of his most successful leadership experiences had come when he had trusted his instincts and acted outside conventional frameworks. The current situation felt like one of those moments when conventional wisdom might not be enough. They spent the morning consulting quietly with their closest advisors, not seeking permission but rather exploring the practical considerations that would need to be addressed. Security arrangements would have to be modified, but not elaborate. Media management would be necessary, but minimal. The goal wasn't to create a photo opportunity but to participate authentically in a moment of national grief. Their private secretary initially expressed concerns about precedent and protocol, but, as they explained their reasoning, she began to understand the emotional logic behind their proposal. Sometimes leadership required stepping outside established frameworks, particularly when those frameworks weren't adequate to address the human needs of the moment. The head of their security detail was more pragmatic in his response. He immediately began considering how to ensure their safety while allowing for the kind of genuine interaction they were envisioning. His primary concern wasn't whether they should go, but how to do it safely and effectively. His quick acceptance of the challenge actually reinforced their confidence in the decision. As midday approached, Catherine found herself thinking about the mechanics of grief and comfort. In her personal experience, the most meaningful gestures of sympathy had always been the unexpected ones, friends who simply showed up without calling first, family members who understood that sometimes presence mattered more than words, colleagues who offered practical help without waiting to be asked. The same principle seemed to apply on a larger scale. The British people were processing a collective trauma, and, while formal acknowledgements and official ceremonies had their place, there was also tremendous value in simple, human recognition of shared sorrow. Sometimes the most powerful message was simply showing up and saying, "We see your pain, we share your grief, and we want to be here with you." William called his father to discuss their plans, knowing that any deviation from standard protocol should be communicated up the chain of command. The conversation was brief but supportive. His father understood the instincts that were driving their decision and offered his backing, along with practical advice about managing such a delicate situation. The final piece of preparation involved their own emotional readiness. They would be stepping into a space of raw public grief, and they needed to be prepared for the intensity of emotion they would encounter. This wouldn't be a formal engagement with carefully managed interactions, it would be an authentic encounter with people processing real trauma in real time. Catherine spent some time in quiet reflection, preparing herself emotionally for what they were about to do. She thought about the losses she had experienced in her own life, the moments when formal sympathy had felt hollow and when genuine human connection had provided real comfort. She wanted to bring that same authenticity to their interaction with the grieving public. William reviewed the security arrangements one final time, ensuring that their safety would be protected without creating barriers that would prevent genuine interaction. The goal was to be accessible while remaining safe, to participate authentically while respecting the spontaneous nature of the memorial. As afternoon arrived, they made their final preparations. There would be no formal announcement, no advance notice to the media, no elaborate coordination with other officials. They would simply walk outside, join the memorial, and participate as fellow citizens in a moment of national mourning. Catherine chose simple, respectful attire that would help her blend into the crowd rather than stand out from it. The goal wasn't to make a fashion statement but to demonstrate through their appearance that they were there as people, not as distant royalty observing from above. William made similar choices, opting for understated clothing that would emphasize their humanity rather than their status. They carried with them simple flowers purchased from a local shop, not elaborate arrangements prepared by palace staff. The gesture was intentionally modest, designed to mirror what they had seen others doing rather than to set themselves apart. They wanted to participate in the memorial on the same terms as everyone else. Their children were told about their plans in simple terms that emphasized the importance of being there for people who were sad, of showing up when community was needed. The explanation served dual purposes, helping their children understand the significance of public service while reinforcing their own sense of purpose about what they were about to do. As they prepared to leave their private quarters, Catherine and William shared a moment of quiet anticipation. They were about to step into uncharted territory, to respond to national grief in a way that felt authentic and necessary but also uncertain and potentially challenging. They were choosing to trust their instincts about what their people needed, even when those instincts led them outside established protocols. The decision felt both momentous and entirely natural. They were about to join their fellow citizens in processing shared trauma, to offer their presence as comfort and their participation as solidarity. It was leadership of the most fundamental kind, showing up when needed, sharing in collective experience, and demonstrating through actions rather than words that no one had to grieve alone. Standing at their door, flowers in hand, they took one final moment to center themselves before stepping into a situation that would test their instincts, their empathy, and their understanding of what it truly meant to serve the British people in their hour of greatest need. The heavy wooden doors of Windsor Castle opened with their familiar creak, but this time the sound carried different weight. Catherine stepped out first, her simple bouquet of white lilies held loosely at her side, followed closely by William carrying his own modest arrangement of roses. The afternoon sun caught the subtle highlights in Catherine's hair as she paused for a moment, taking in the scene that had become so familiar from their windows but felt entirely different now that they were about to become part of it. The crowd was smaller than it had been the previous evening, perhaps 200 people scattered across the grounds in small clusters and solitary figures. Some sat quietly on portable chairs they had brought from home, others stood in contemplative silence, and a few walked slowly among the growing memorial, reading the messages that accompanied the thousands of flowers. Children played quietly nearby while their parents maintained their vigil, their laughter a gentle counterpoint to the overall atmosphere of solemn reflection. William and Catherine's security detail had taken positions that were protective but unobtrusive, allowing them to move freely while maintaining the necessary safety protocols. The officers had been briefed to allow natural interactions to develop, intervening only if absolutely necessary for security reasons. This delicate balance would prove crucial to the success of what was about to unfold. As they walked down the familiar path that led from the castle to the public areas, Catherine felt her heart rate increase. Not from nervousness about their safety or concern about protocol, but from the emotional anticipation of stepping into a space of collective grief. She had attended many formal memorial services and ceremonies of remembrance, but this would be different. This would be raw, unscripted, and entirely authentic. The first person to notice their approach was a middle-aged woman sitting alone on a small folding stool, holding a photograph against her chest. She looked up as they drew near, and Catherine could see the moment of recognition cross her features. But, instead of the formal acknowledgement that typically greeted their public appearances, the woman's expression remained soft and welcoming, as if she were greeting friends who had come to share in her vigil. "Your Royal Highnesses," the woman said quietly, rising from her seat with a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming." The simple words carried profound meaning. There was no formality in her greeting, no sense that she was addressing distant royalty. Instead, her tone suggested gratitude for their presence as fellow mourners, as people who cared enough to show up during a difficult time. Catherine felt immediately that they had made the right decision. "We wanted to be here with everyone," Catherine replied, her voice carrying the same gentle tone. "Would you mind if we joined you?" The woman's smile deepened as she gestured toward the memorial area. "Of course. We're all here for the same reason." As word of their presence spread quietly through the crowd, a remarkable thing happened. Instead of the usual rush of people seeking photos or formal interactions, the atmosphere remained respectfully subdued. People acknowledged their presence with nods and quiet greetings, but the focus remained on the memorial itself and the collective act of remembrance taking place. Catherine knelt down to place her flowers among the thousands of others, taking a moment to read some of the handwritten messages that accompanied nearby bouquets. The notes were heartbreaking in their simplicity and sincerity. "You will not be forgotten, our hearts are broken, thank you for everything, rest in peace." Each message represented someone's attempt to process grief and loss, to find words for emotions that often seemed beyond language. A young father approached with his daughter, who appeared to be about 6 years old. The little girl clutched a small bunch of wildflowers that she had clearly picked herself, their stems uneven and leaves slightly wilted from small hands. She looked up at Catherine with the direct curiosity that only children possess, unencumbered by the social conventions that often complicated adult interactions. "Are you sad too?" the little girl asked Catherine, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone that children use when discussing important matters. Catherine knelt down to the child's eye level, a gesture that immediately put them on equal ground. "Yes, sweetheart, I am sad too. We're all sad together." The little girl nodded seriously and handed Catherine one of her wildflowers. "This will help," she said with the confident certainty of childhood. Flowers always help when people are sad. The exchange was brief but profound, capturing in a few simple words and gestures the essence of what William and Catherine had hoped to achieve. They weren't there as distant royalty offering formal condolences, they were there as fellow human beings sharing in collective grief and finding comfort in community. William found himself in conversation with an elderly gentleman who had been a veteran of military service. The man spoke quietly about loss and sacrifice, about the importance of coming together during difficult times, and about his appreciation for leaders who understood the value of showing up when it mattered. Their conversation meandered through topics of service, duty, and the bonds that form between people who share common values and experiences. "You know," the veteran said thoughtfully, "in all my years of service, I learned that the most important thing a leader can do is be present when people need them. Not making speeches or cutting ribbons, but just being there when things are hard." William nodded, understanding completely. His own military experience had taught him similar lessons about the importance of presence and solidarity during difficult times. The formal aspects of leadership had their place, but it was often the quiet moments of shared experience that created the strongest bonds between leaders and those they served. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine and William found themselves naturally integrating into the various small groups that had formed throughout the memorial area. They listened to stories, offered quiet comfort, and shared in the collective processing of grief that was taking place. Each interaction was unique, but all were characterized by a remarkable sense of equality and mutual respect. One particularly moving encounter occurred when Catherine met a group of women who had organized themselves into an informal support network. They had been taking turns maintaining the memorial, ensuring that flowers were arranged properly, that messages weren't damaged by weather, and that the space remained peaceful and respectful. Their quiet dedication had gone unnoticed by most, but Catherine recognized it immediately as the kind of community leadership that often went unacknowledged. "You've created something beautiful here," Catherine told them, gesturing toward the carefully maintained memorial. "The way you've organized everything, the care you've taken, it means so much." The women were initially surprised by her recognition of their efforts, but quickly opened up about their motivations and experiences. They spoke about the importance of having a place to process grief collectively, about the healing that came from shared experience, and about their determination to ensure that the memorial remained a space of dignity and respect. William spent considerable time with a group of teenagers who had initially seemed uncertain about how to participate in such a formal feeling event. Their discomfort was understandable. Grief and memorial services often felt like adult activities that didn't naturally include young people. But William's easy manner and genuine interest in their perspectives quickly drew them into conversation. The teenagers spoke about their confusion and fear in the face of national tragedy, about their struggle to understand how such events could happen, and about their desire to contribute something meaningful to the collective response. William listened carefully and offered his own reflections about processing difficult emotions and finding constructive ways to respond to circumstances beyond their control. "It's okay to not have all the answers," he told them. "Sometimes the most important thing is just showing up and being part of the community response. What you're doing by being here matters." One of the most unexpected encounters came when Catherine met a woman who had traveled several hours to attend the memorial. The woman had no direct connection to the tragedy but felt compelled to participate in the national response. She spoke about the importance of solidarity, about the way communities could support each other across geographic and social boundaries, and about her belief that shared grief could become shared strength.
I couldn't just stay home, the woman explained. I needed to be part of this, to add my voice to everyone else's. It felt like the only way to honor what happened.
Catherine was deeply moved by the woman's dedication and the sacrifices she had made to be present. It reinforced her understanding that the memorial had become more than just a place to leave flowers. It had evolved into a gathering point for people seeking connection and community during a time of national crisis. As evening approached, the character of the memorial began to shift. The daytime visitors who had jobs and responsibilities to return to were gradually replaced by people who had come specifically to participate in the evening vigil. Small battery-operated candles began to appear, creating pools of warm light throughout the memorial area. Catherine and William had planned to stay for a few hours, but they found themselves reluctant to leave. The conversations continued to develop and deepen, the connections they were making felt increasingly meaningful, and the sense of community that had formed around them was unlike anything they had experienced in their formal royal roles. A local church group arrived with thermoses of tea and coffee, which they distributed freely to anyone who wanted refreshment. Their arrival created another opportunity for Catherine and William to observe and participate in the kind of spontaneous community organization that was emerging around the memorial. People naturally took responsibility for different aspects of maintaining the space and supporting other visitors. One of the most touching moments occurred when an impromptu choir formed as people began humming and, then, quietly singing familiar hymns and folk songs. Catherine and William joined in when they knew the words, their voices blending with the collective sound that rose gently into the evening air. The music wasn't formally organized or professionally performed, but it carried an emotional power that no concert hall could have matched. As full darkness fell, the memorial transformed into something even more magical and moving. The candles created a gentle constellation of light, and the continued presence of dedicated mourners gave the space a sense of sacred purpose. Children who had been playing quietly earlier in the day now sat closer to their parents, sensing the increased solemnity of the evening hours. Catherine and William realized that they had experienced something unprecedented in their royal careers. They had participated in authentic community formation, had contributed to collective healing, and had demonstrated leadership through presence rather than position. The formal protocols and elaborate ceremonies that typically defined their public roles had been replaced by something far more fundamental and powerful. As they finally prepared to leave, dozens of people approached to thank them for coming, but the gratitude felt mutual. Catherine and William understood that they had received far more than they had given. They had witnessed the very best of human nature, had participated in genuine community, and had learned profound lessons about leadership, service, and the power of shared experience. The walk back to the castle felt like a journey between worlds. They were returning to their formal roles and official responsibilities, but they carried with them the memory of an afternoon and evening that had redefined their understanding of what it meant to serve the British people during their time of greatest need. The days following their spontaneous participation in the memorial brought with them a transformation that neither William nor Catherine had fully anticipated. News of their quiet gesture had spread not through official palace announcements or carefully orchestrated media campaigns, but through the organic networks of social media and word of mouth that characterize genuine grassroots movements. The people who had been present at the memorial shared their experiences, posting photos and describing encounters that had moved them deeply. What emerged in the public consciousness wasn't a story about royal protocol or formal duty, but rather a narrative about authentic human connection during a time of collective crisis. The images that circulated showed Catherine kneeling among the flowers, reading handwritten messages with genuine attention, William sitting on the ground talking earnestly with children, both of them participating naturally in the evening candlelight vigil. These weren't posed photographs or official portraits, but candid moments that captured something real and unguarded. Catherine woke on the third morning after their memorial visit to find her private secretary waiting with an unprecedented collection of responses from the public. Letters, emails, and social media messages had been pouring in at a rate that exceeded anything they had seen before. But, more importantly, the tone and content of these messages were unlike the usual formal correspondence that typically followed royal engagements. "Your Royal Highness," her secretary began carefully, I've never seen anything quite like this.
People aren't writing to thank you for performing a duty or fulfilling an obligation. They're writing to thank you for being human." The letters that Catherine read that morning reinforced this observation. They came from people who had been at the memorial as well as others who had only heard about or seen images of their participation. But, regardless of their direct involvement, the writers expressed something that went far beyond conventional gratitude for royal service. One letter particularly moved Catherine. It came from the elderly woman they had first encountered at the memorial, the one who had been sitting alone with a photograph. She wrote about her surprise at seeing them approach, but, more importantly, she described the way their presence had changed the entire atmosphere of the memorial. "It wasn't that you were there as royalty," the woman had written in her careful handwriting. "It was that you were there as people who understood what it meant to be sad and who wanted to be sad together with the rest of us. You didn't try to make speeches or fix anything. You just came and sat with us in our grief, and that made all the difference." William was experiencing similar responses in his own correspondence. Military veterans, community leaders, and ordinary citizens were writing to express appreciation not for any specific action he had taken, but for what they perceived as a fundamental shift in how leadership could be exercised during times of crisis. They wrote about the power of presence, about the importance of leaders who were willing to step outside formal roles when human needs demanded it. The media response proved equally revealing. While some outlets focused on the breach of traditional protocol, the overwhelming majority of coverage emphasized the emotional impact of their gesture. Commentators who typically analyzed royal activities through the lens of precedent and procedure found themselves discussing concepts like authentic leadership, emotional intelligence, and the evolving relationship between the monarchy and the British people. More significantly, their actions seemed to have inspired similar responses throughout the country. Reports began coming in of other public figures, community leaders, and ordinary citizens organizing their own informal memorial gatherings. The model of simple, authentic community response was being replicated in towns and cities across Britain, creating a network of grassroots healing that far exceeded anything that could have been achieved through formal channels. Catherine found herself reflecting deeply on the psychological and emotional dimensions of what they had experienced. Her university studies in psychology had introduced her to concepts about collective trauma and community healing, but witnessing and participating in these processes in real time had provided insights that no textbook could have conveyed. She realized that what they had stumbled upon wasn't just an effective way to respond to a specific crisis, but rather a fundamental truth about leadership in democratic societies. People didn't just want leaders who could make decisions and deliver speeches, they wanted leaders who could share in their experiences, who understood their emotions, and who were willing to be vulnerable alongside them. William's reflections took a slightly different direction, influenced by his military background and his formal preparation for kingship. He had always understood leadership as a combination of decision-making, responsibility, and the ability to provide direction during uncertain times. But his experience at the memorial had introduced him to a different model of leadership based on presence, empathy, and shared experience. The two models weren't contradictory, but they were complementary in ways he hadn't previously understood. There were times when people needed their leaders to make difficult decisions, provide clear direction, and take responsibility for complex challenges. But there were also times when people needed their leaders to simply be present, to acknowledge shared humanity, and to participate authentically in collective experiences. Perhaps most importantly, both William and Catherine began to understand that their roles as future king and queen might need to evolve in ways that previous generations hadn't anticipated. The traditional model of monarchy as a distant, formal institution that provided stability through consistency and precedent might need to be balanced with a more accessible, emotionally intelligent approach that could respond to the psychological and emotional needs of modern citizens. The letters and messages they received provided valuable insights into how the British people were thinking about leadership, community, and the role of institutions in their daily lives. Many writers expressed appreciation for what they saw as a more human approach to royal service, but they also articulated expectations that this kind of authentic engagement would continue in future challenges and opportunities. One particularly thoughtful letter came from a university professor who had studied the sociology of leadership during crisis periods.
She wrote about the memorial visit in the context of historical examples of leaders who had successfully navigated periods of collective trauma by balancing formal authority with genuine human connection. Her analysis suggested that William and Catherine had intuitively discovered principles that aligned with the most effective leadership models throughout history. Catherine shared this letter with William over breakfast one morning, and they found themselves engaged in the kind of deep conversation about their roles and responsibilities that had become more frequent since their memorial experience. They were beginning to understand that their spontaneous gesture had revealed something important, not just about public expectations, but about their own potential to serve in ways they hadn't previously considered. The implications extended beyond their personal development as leaders. Their children were watching and learning from their parents' approach to service and responsibility. The lessons being absorbed weren't just about proper behavior or royal protocol, but about the importance of empathy, community engagement, and the willingness to step outside comfort zones when circumstances demanded authentic response. Their staff noticed changes in how William and Catherine approached their official engagements following the memorial visit. They asked more questions about the emotional context of events they would be attending. They requested more opportunities for informal interaction with attendees. They expressed increased interest in understanding the personal stories and individual experiences of people they would be meeting. These changes required adjustments in planning and protocol, but the staff quickly recognized that they were witnessing the evolution of more effective and emotionally intelligent leadership. The formal aspects of royal engagements remained important, but they were being enhanced by a deeper understanding of human psychology and community needs. International observers also took notice of what had occurred at Windsor Castle. Other royal families and political leaders began studying the British example as a potential model for their own crisis response strategies. The combination of authenticity, accessibility, and respect for organic community formation was seen as particularly relevant for leaders operating in democratic societies where public trust and emotional connection were increasingly important. Several months after their memorial visit, Catherine and William were invited to speak at a conference on leadership during crisis periods. They accepted the invitation but insisted on structuring their presentation around the lessons they had learned rather than the actions they had taken. They wanted to emphasize the insights that had emerged from their experience rather than positioning themselves as experts who had discovered some new technique. Their presentation focused on 3 key principles they had derived from their memorial experience. First, the importance of recognizing when formal protocols might be inadequate for addressing human needs. Second, the value of authentic participation in community experiences rather than observation from positions of authority. Third, the power of presence and shared vulnerability in building trust and connection during difficult times. The audience response to their presentation was overwhelmingly positive, but, more importantly, it led to substantive discussions about practical applications of these principles in various leadership contexts. The memorial visit had become more than just a successful royal engagement, it had contributed to broader conversations about effective leadership in complex, emotionally charged situations. As time passed and the immediate crisis that had prompted their memorial visit receded into memory, William and Catherine found that the experience continued to influence their approach to their royal duties. They had discovered capabilities they hadn't known they possessed and had developed insights that proved applicable to a wide range of challenges and opportunities. The memorial visit had taught them that sometimes the most powerful leadership actions were the simplest ones. Showing up, paying attention, and participating authentically in shared experiences could accomplish things that elaborate ceremonies and carefully crafted speeches could never achieve. They had learned that their greatest strength as leaders might not be their formal authority or official status, but their capacity for genuine human connection and their willingness to be vulnerable alongside the people they served. Most importantly, they had discovered that true service sometimes required setting aside the safety and predictability of established protocols in favor of responding authentically to the immediate human needs of the moment. It was a lesson that would serve them well in the years ahead as they continued to evolve in their roles as leaders, parents, and servants of the British people. The quiet gesture that had begun as an instinctive response to collective grief had become a defining moment in their development as leaders and in their understanding of what modern monarchy could be at its very best.